Pokrovsk is a real hell.
There, just like last week, is the highest intensity of fighting, with a heavy concentration of Russian forces.
From Rostov to Kamchatka, partisans are setting Russia on fire. A new no-analogs weapon. Putin spoke about Russia's most powerful weapon.
An unmanned underwater device, Poseidon. There's nothing like it in the world, and it's unlikely anything will appear anytime soon, and there are no interception methods. And
The bunker moth is once again announcing the Sarmat missile.
there's nothing in the world like Sarmat. And it's not even on active duty with us yet. It will be on duty soon.
Lukashenko will bring Putin some potatoes.
What should I give you as a gift? He says potatoes. I'll send them to him in the Kremlin. He'll swallow all 4 sacks at once.
And the Kremlin grandpa will respond with hazelnuts.
The nuclear complex is already on its way to Belarus, and by December it will be on combat duty. What's more, he's demanding 10 more of these from the Kremlin.
A revolution in the sky. The first flight of the American supersonic and silent aircraft.
So, it's been 2 weeks of Putin trying to scare Donald Trump with nukes. This time, it's Poseidon's turn. He announced successful tests of the nuclear torpedo. Trump accepts this challenge and notably announces his own exercises in the United States of America. Well, let's see if this leads to a direct nuclear confrontation. Meanwhile, by the way, the situation around Pokrovsk remains critical. Let's talk about this in more detail. Let's watch the report, and afterwards we'll discuss all the details with a military analyst. I, Alexander Prepodobny, am waiting for you in the studio.
Ukraine is once again under the occupiers' crosshairs. The Russians have carried out a massive attack with missiles and drones. Tensions are also rising at the front. The most difficult situation remains in the Pokrovsk direction, where the intensity of fighting is high. A large number of occupiers are concentrated there. The Russians are trying to gain a foothold by any means necessary.
The main tactic of the Russian forces. Small assault groups are attempting to create an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian defense forces directly in Pokrovsk itself. At the moment, the actual line of contact is the key defensive positions of the Ukrainian defense forces, the so-called CTD. Despite the extremely difficult situation, the Ukrainian defense forces are carrying out successful counteroffensive actions, and at the moment, the area under the control of the Ukrainian defense forces has increased to 200 square kilometers. In the
Kupiansk area of Kharkiv region, fierce fighting continues. The occupiers are trying to gain a foothold in the northern part of the city. However, there is no question of any encirclement of Ukrainian troops. The situation in Melnorad and its surroundings is also fully under control by the Ukrainian armed forces.
At the moment, the main efforts of the occupiers are not aimed at blocking the Ukrainian defense forces directly in Kupiansk, but rather at the possibility of breaking through to the Kupiansk railway hub. The occupiers need control over this key railway station in order to use the short logistics route from the territory of the Russian Federation and the occupied areas of Luhansk region to form a strike group whose goal will be to advance along the Oskil River towards Sloviansk, towards the Kramatorsk agglomeration.
Meanwhile, Putin has come out with a new scare tactic, and the bunker dweller continues to talk about the successful tests of Russia's so-called wonder weapon.
These are unmanned underwater vehicles which are remotely operated. Poseidon as well, with a nuclear power unit. For the very first time ever, we successfully managed not only to launch it from the carrier submarine by using the starting engine, but also, quite importantly, to start up and operate the nuclear power unit itself. This achievement marks a significant milestone in our technological progress.
But Putin did not provide any evidence, details of the tests, location, route, duration, or any other specifics.
Neither Poseidon nor, accordingly, Burevestnik have been put into serial production or placed on combat duty. So talking about any kind of threat from these mythical Russian wonder weapons is pointless. NATO and specifically the United States have not the slightest reason to be concerned.
But despite this, the ALCO president Medvedev called Poseidon a doomsday weapon and at the same time threatened Belgium with a nuclear strike. Let us recall that the Belgian Minister of Defense stated that if Russia strikes the country's capital, NATO members will level Moscow to the ground.
This is nothing more than There have been several information dumps, meaning large, significant releases of information that Western allies have, over time, essentially stopped reacting to or even acknowledging in any meaningful or substantial way. The reaction of the Russian Federation's ambassador to Belgium in response to the statement made by that country's defense minister is quite telling, as it clearly demonstrates a state of complete confusion and a notable lack of preparedness for such a tough, direct, and uncompromising statement coming from one of the members of the NATO bloc.
Against the backdrop of the Kremlin dictator's loud statements, Donald Trump has moved to action. The American president has instructed the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing.
These are nuclear weapons tests by the United States. This is a tough military response by the country and President Trump to such information dumps from the Russian Federation. Moreover, Trump made a very tough statement that the United States possesses the world's leading nuclear capability. Russia is in second place and China is conditionally third.
At the same time, the US has begun a large-scale reduction of its military presence in Eastern Europe.
On the one hand, by announcing such plans during the rotation period, I want to emphasize once again, the United States is strengthening its nuclear presence in European countries. Let me stress again, this is the redeployment of the nuclear arsenal to the United Kingdom. This is the redeployment of nuclear submarines, and this is the presence of an American aircraft carrier in the territorial waters of Denmark. In other words, all of this actually points to a strengthening of the US military presence near the immediate borders of the Russian Federation.
Let's figure out how far these threats could reach Russians and whether they will move into the practical realm. To clarify these circumstances, Alexei Hetman, a military analyst, is joining our broadcast. Alexei, hello, we're glad to see you.
Yes, hello.
Please, could you give us your assessment? Medvedev said that Poseidon is essentially a doomsday weapon for the Russians. Moreover, over the past week, Putin has been constantly testing some kind of nuclear weapon, either at the general staff or at the command post. They actually started with the Burevestnik, then the Yars, then it moved back to the Burevestnik, and now it's Poseidon. Every 2 days there's a new nuclear test. Please tell us, who is currently winning in this game of blackmail, the Russians or the Americans? Or is there even any real confrontation between them in this regard? Is there a standoff at all? How do you see it?
I don't think there's any real confrontation. Trump reacted once. He said that, well, Trump and the Secretary of Defense, there should be some kind of reaction in Belgium because they're constantly trying to scare the whole world with nuclear weapons. They keep saying that there are no analogs, but out of 13 test launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles, only 2 were successful. So they can say whatever they want. As for nuclear weapons have a shelf life. But we understand that uranium, which is inside a nuclear warhead, decays over time. Well, everyone has heard the words half-life period. So if purified uranium is inside a warhead, does it not decay? What? Its period is over, physics has stopped working, it definitely still decays. Where does what it decays into go? It stays right there in the same warhead. And over time, the activity of this uranium decreases because what it decays into appears, and that's why roughly 10 to a maximum of 15 years. A nuclear warhead requires modernization, meaning it is removed, sent for reprocessing, and the uranium is purified again. In order for a chain reaction to occur, if it is not pure enough, the chain reaction will not happen. This is called a dirty bomb. No one intentionally makes a dirty bomb. A dirty bomb is an expired nuclear bomb. As far as is known, since 1991, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian nuclear arsenal has not been modernized or changed. There is no information that they periodically replace nuclear warheads, renew them, re-enrich them, and put them back where they are supposed to be stored. Therefore, the likelihood that something of theirs will actually fly intercontinentally is, well, 2 out of 13, judging by what we see. The probability that a bomb will actually detonate, one that would terrify the whole world, is even lower. So these conversations, they are more about, well, it seems like it's just a conversation at some meeting, but for some reason we see it broadcasted on air. In our country, we see it, the whole world sees it. So it's clearly intended for an external audience. So supposedly by accident, this kind of information ends up in the mass media. Therefore, you can't say they don't have weapons. They do have weapons. They have nuclear weapons and a lot of other serious stuff, more or less, but it's nowhere near as impressive as they try to make it out to be. Regarding the Poseidon missile, the 100 megaton one, they claimed it could cause a tsunami. You know, I don't really want to recall some not so appropriate jokes, but let's try to lighten up the situation a bit. As people get older, I'm already 70, and things aren't working out with my wife the way they should. But my neighbor is 80, and he says that everything is fine for them, excuse me for the word, sex. What should I do? Doctor, what should I do? You tell us too. Well, pretty much the same thing.
Excellent. Listen, but Trump actually does react to these threats, doesn't he? Well, at least with words. But will there be any action? He ordered the Pentagon to immediately begin testing nuclear weapons after Putin's statement about the Burevestnik. And then right away, Peskov walks it all back, saying that they hope the information was conveyed to Trump correctly. That's how he reacted to the Burevestnik missile tests. Supposedly these weren't nuclear tests, Donald. Not nuclear, everything's fine. So explain this, will the US go for the same kind of escalation by conducting tests and continuing this rhetoric? Or not? And in general, would they be making the right decision in this situation, whether they do or don't? Tell us.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The United States' gross domestic product is about 20% of the world's total, and the Russian Federation's is about 1%. The Pentagon's budget is 3 times larger than the entire budget of the Russian Federation. So, naturally, no one wants to argue with madmen who have a nuclear bomb. They want to reach an agreement with them, and for that they take certain steps to meet them halfway. Some handshakes, perhaps a few friendly greetings, maybe riding in a car together for a while, sharing some conversation, and so on. If that doesn't work, then for those countries and leaders who are much, much stronger than the United States would be without the support of NATO, much stronger both economically in terms of financial power and resources and militarily, with greater armed forces and advanced technology than the Russian Federation, other alternative methods have to be used. In other words, as former President Trump often says, peace is achieved through strength, or, to put it another way, peace through strength. If we try to negotiate with them as if they were a reckless child with a grenade and they don't understand, then they'll get it in a way that makes them understand. This doesn't mean that a strike will be carried out against Russia, but just to knock some sense into them a little, you know. Again, well, we wanted to have an evening of anecdotes. When Brezhnev asks, "Where did you get this from?" he says, "I saw it on the program Vremya." In other words, they themselves put out the information and then they start to believe it themselves. They were told clearly that there are submarines not far from the Russian Federation and the flight time is minimal. If something is unclear, it increases. Rational nuclear rationality, American in Europe. There is an aircraft carrier, well, just as the previous speaker mentioned. To put it simply, the Minister of Defense of Belgium said that if a strike is carried out against the capitals of European states, then we will wipe them off the face of the earth. You know, it's probably because our partners, and thank God this happened, understand that they are not dealing with the same kind of civilized people as Europeans or Americans. I mean the politicians. There are fools in every country, but at the level of the country's leadership, Russia behaves like street thugs. But that's exactly how they start talking to them. You have to speak to them in a language they can understand. And this is that language. We'll respond, not diplomatically. We'll just level everything to the ground. That's it. That got through. It seems to me that both Peskov and his reaction, no, these weren't nuclear tests. Seriously. Of course, those weren't nuclear tests. It was a test of an intercontinental ballistic missile which can carry a nuclear warhead. Once again, Peskov is playing dumb, or maybe they think that people in America and Europe are fools. That's why you have to talk to them, to these thugs, in their own language, so that they get the message. Because it seems to me they just don't understand when you try to explain the situation diplomatically or in a civilized way.
Well, maybe this is actually a good precedent.
That's just my subjective opinion.
Maybe this is actually a good precedent for the American administration to gauge the Kremlin's reaction, to see what actions the Kremlin really responds to and which ones it doesn't. Alexei, it's very important to discuss as we wrap up Trump's statement after his meeting with Xi Jinping, because everyone was saying this was a historic meeting, a super important meeting that could change at least
the course of the war, 12 out of 10.
So what do we actually see as a result? So Trump says sometimes you have to let them fight. Here's the full quote. We talked a lot about Ukraine. We'll work together to achieve some kind of result. We agreed that both sides are at a stalemate. Sometimes they need to fight. Apparently to let them fight. Madness, says Trump. But he will help us, and we will work together on Ukraine. This is about Xi Jinping. How do you assess this? What is this even about?
Basically, from the
Point of view of military actions, what does this mean? Will there be supplies or not?
there will. It's pretty clear what's going on here. But we have to understand Trump's specifics. We've already learned a bit about him, especially during his second term. They are trying, the current United States administration, to put pressure on Russia through sanctions and everything else. Russia is not entering into any negotiations or anything else. They are trying to put pressure on our country to make a good offer there. We respond that we cannot and will not give up territory in exchange for our own territory. Well, that's the nonsense proposed by the Russian Federation. And the fact that we don't want to do this is clear to both the Americans and the Europeans. And in principle, they support us in this. Us, not Russia. That's why he meant that they should be allowed to fight. Well, that's how he put it, not very delicately. Most likely, he meant deep down that the sides are not ready for any agreements because our side is putting forward reasonable conditions, while the Russians are unacceptable. So, unfortunately, for now, we'll have to prove we're right, if you can put it that way, on the battlefield. And for that, this is probably part of what Trump calls peace through strength. I don't think it will decrease. The amount of weapons, on the contrary, will increase because the pressure shouldn't be on us. It's useless to pressure us, even if the supply of all weapons stops completely, believe me, take my word for it. As someone who, though formerly served in the war, and I know the mood of our comrades, we will wage a partisan war. We will not surrender, no matter what. We will not surrender? Remember the history of Ukraine, the military formations and how they operated. Believe me, that would be even more terrifying. That's why, most likely, the discussion is not about stopping support for us, but on the contrary, about giving us more weapons, so that we can crush Russia on the battlefield, so that we can deliver the maximum number of long-range strikes on important energy, military, industrial, and political targets, on command posts deep within the territory of the Russian Federation, and then, in principle, Russia, but it might agree to at least some kind of ceasefire or the start of negotiations. In other words, this is peace through strength.
Alexei, to wrap up, we have just a little time left. What is the situation in Pokrovsk and in Kupiansk? Because Syrskyi has now essentially said that our forces are not encircled there, contrary to what various media outlets have reported. What do you know and what should we be paying attention to right now? How dangerous is it in these areas?
Well, it's dangerous. There have been active hostilities near Pokrovsk for over a year now. Between a third and half of all combat clashes are happening precisely in the Pokrovsk direction. Troops are being pulled in there, with additional forces being redeployed from the Syrskyi direction. Syrskyi said that already in the summer there were 111,000 troops concentrated there, and I think that number is increasing. They want to bring in the National Guard, the Rosgvardier, and so on to join the assault groups there. So the situation there is difficult. It really is. The troops are not surrounded. Some, about 200 people, slipped through our positions, because on the map it's just a line. The front line is just a line, but on the ground it's firing positions. There are distances of hundreds of meters between them, and small groups of 2 or 3 people can get through there. They can sneak in and try to establish themselves directly in the city. Isolated street fighting is happening in the city as well, but the Russians do not control the city. These groups are made up of special operations forces from the main intelligence directorate. There are units specifically tasked with counter-sabotage activities. They protect against such groups that have managed to infiltrate. So, regarding information coming from the Russian side, they constantly spread false information, but we need to understand why they do it. Let's not underestimate them. Underestimating the enemy is a dangerous thing. They're not trying to convince people that our troops are surrounded there or that Pokrovsk is captured. They know perfectly well that this can be easily checked. Their goal is completely different, and they're almost achieving that goal. The goal for a certain group of people is to sow doubt. And we really do, after all, They simply don't talk about the encirclement there, meaning the goal is to sow doubt and erode the last bit of trust in our official information, whether it's from the main intelligence directorate, the general staff, or the president. The stakes are high. Gabanovich, that's exactly the task. It's written in those textbooks, it's studied in the second year. These are the methods used due to the nature of Moscow-style backroom dealings. This is how diversionary information warfare is conducted. In other words, no, they're not even senior level, and the goal isn't to convince people of a lie, but rather to sow doubt. And unfortunately, even Maxim falls for it. So they're just following the notes from the junior courses.
Well, yes, no one doubts the intentions of the Russians. The most important thing is that our military command truly preserves the lives of our soldiers and makes timely decisions. Thank you very much. Alexei Hetman, military analyst, was on the air with Ukraine Today. All the best.
Take care.